Thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Eric Tang, founder of Livepeer and Livepeer Studios. Livepeer is a video infrastructure built for Web3 developers. We're going to get into what that even means. Eric, I'm so excited to have you on the show and chat with you about not only the technology, but also Web3 and kind of its evolution and even its current state, for those who don't know where it is and its maturity and all the technology that are being built on it and what it even means to build on Web3. But before we get into all that good stuff, what were you doing before you started Livepeer?
Yeah, thank you, Julian, for inviting me. Yeah, what was I doing before starting Livepeer? I've always been an entrepreneur, New York-based. This is the third project that I've started. Prior to this, I started a company called Hyperpublic. It was acquired by Groupon back in the heyday of Groupon. And then I started another company called Wildcard, which, really inspired, the Livepeer, which has been around for about 5 years. Yeah, so always been in tech. Started out as a technical engineer, product manager, now founder.
I love that. And talk about the acquisition. I love to talk to founders who go through, acquisition process because it's so unique and so interesting, the different decisions you make, when you're going through this process. Did you have a few companies interested in the product, or was Groupon kind of the one that was kind of a head and shoulders above the others that were interested in what you were building?
Yeah, for sure. I think, kind of the approach of the acquisition is always that better to approach it when you don't need to be acquired. So for us, it was lucky that we were kind of evaluating whether to raise a round of funding. Yeah, really, we weren't thinking about being an acquisition at all. And Groupon was actually one of our biggest users at that time. We were approaching some of our investors, and through the investor kind of relations network, got connected to the BD, the BD arms at Groupon. So they heard about it. We're trying to build this team internally. We already use you guys. Yeah. Would you be interested to talk about what for the acquisition to happen? And, at that time, I was in my early mid-20s, no idea what an acquisition meant. So I just went through that crazy.
Yeah. Would you have done it differently?
No. I think it was a really educational experience for me. Just, we had really great partners in the law firm was actually really helpful in that process. Yeah. So they really coached us in, kind of what are the questions that you should be asking for? How do you approach it? Yeah. When they ask certain questions, right? And so it's always, I feel like every acquisition is a bit of a dance. They try to, people are trying to negotiate in that process, right? But, I think if both sides go into the process with the end goal in mind, with the aligned end goal in mind, it oftentimes come out to be a good outcome. Yeah. And then of course there's also the post-acquisition, process, which is also a great learning experience.
Yeah. What did you learn in particular that you kind of remember, or maybe even that you would give a founder advice if they're going through a similar process now?
I would say, my number one advice would probably be know really well what your bottom line is. Cause at the end of the negotiation process, right? You need to know just exactly what you're not willing to give on and what you're willing to give on. Right. And so just be very clear and be consistent throughout. Cause, through that process, emotions can go high and low. Right. So just having that clear consistency, I think is the most helpful thing. The important thing. And then post-acquisition, I think it's, again, setting really clear expectations going into it and have partners work as partners instead of as adversaries. Sometimes people can easily fall into the trap and just makes the whole process much harder.
Yeah. When you say post-acquisition, were you kind of acqui-hired through that process, or were you working with them to make sure that technology was, integrated within their team? Yeah,
we were building a location-based data company. This was back in, 2010 when, location platforms were just starting. Yeah. And we built this data platform that developer API that allowed anybody to kind of query based on coordinate, all the different points of interest around that coordinate, right? So imagine if you're scrolling around Google Maps and you need to know all the good restaurants, right? That's the API that you can call and get all the information. We categorize those information really well. There's good pictures and things like that allows developers to build a beautiful application experience. And Groupon was, of course, one of the biggest location company at the time, and they were relying on our data a lot internally.
Yeah.
So So they really wanted to have that capability internally. And so eventually, so after the acquisition, our product became the internal Groupon data product, right? That powered all the different applications inside Groupon. And it was really interesting to kind of see through that, helping through the acquisition process, helping with the technical integration process, learning how a big company, over 10,000 people actually work, right? Like try to integrate with all these, almost like small companies within a large company. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Is there something that, you saw that Groupon did well? I'm most curious and ask this question a lot for founders who enter either a big company, whether they're working or have some kind of, intimate relationship with. Is there something that a big companies do, Groupon in particular, that you kind of translated or took into Livepeer and the other companies you started running? Anything in particular, whether it's structure or culture or anything within that vein that you think kind of it left an impression for the future companies you'd built?
Yeah. I would say it was a really interesting phase in that company's history when we got acquired, because they were going through just the fastest. I think Groupon was the fastest growing startup at the time, like in history, right? When they're in their heyday, and the way they grew is, through lots of acquisitions. So we were in this environment where everyone was super entrepreneurial, right? Essentially like a bunch of small startups that got put into this one environment, and everybody's trying to figure out like, how can I create impact? How can I get value, right? And people are really go-getters. So like the way that, that office, we were, in the Palo Alto office where the engineering headquarters were, and just the amount of interesting ideas that people had, sometimes related to the core business, sometimes not, right? Like, but it was really cool to see how, if you put a group of really entrepreneurial people together, that it creates like a totally different atmosphere.
Yeah.
Than like what you would think of as like maybe like a more sleepy company culture. And that was exciting. So I try to emulate that, but in my subsequent companies, right? Like always looking for really entrepreneurial people and people with really interesting ideas, and try to foster the culture of people bringing up good ideas and sharing those ideas. And that's always been a really helpful thing with building culture.
Yeah. I want to circle back on culture for sure in terms of Livepeer and structurally, what you're doing that you think, is kind of leading the company in the right direction. But before I get into that, what got you into blockchain and Web3 and started playing around with this technology? Livepeer, I think, was 2016 is when you opened the doors and started working on the project. But was it then and there that you started really integrating with the new technology, or was it before that? And when and what kind of catalyzed your decision to, kind of dive into blockchain and Web3?
Yeah. So when, after the Groupon session, I stayed there for a little while, and eventually, started another company with the same co-founders that I started the previous company with. And in this company, it was the early days of mobile, and we tried to build we built a mobile data platform and then an application on top that was, one of the top apps in the Apple App Store in 2017. But throughout that period, because the business was built very much on top of other mobile platforms, right? So, Facebook, Google, Twitter, Instagram, those types of mobile platform that really captivated the mobile audience at that time. Because we were building on top of those platforms, and, at the very beginning, those APIs were very open, and, they courted developers to come and build on top and gave a lot of opportunities to those developers that are building on top. But over time, every single one of those platforms started to have their APIs to be more restricted, and to the point where they never really opened up all these, like they basically captured all the opportunities in the underlying platform, shared those opportunities with developers that were built on top. Like perfect example is Zynga, right? Like Zynga grew so much on the back of Facebook, and eventually Facebook's like, you know what, we're going to take gaming now. Buy Zynga, right? And then and that was a huge hit for the company. So, that the lesson that we learned there is that don't build on other people, like don't have platform risk. Don't build on these like proprietary closed platforms and have your whole business, be beyond that, right? And so when blockchain first came out, that type of like permissionless innovation really attracted us. And, Bitcoin came out sooner than Ethereum did, and we were interested. But when Ethereum first came out, that the AlphaNet came out, the white paper came out, that's that's when we really started getting into the blockchain space. First, by just building open source projects within the Ethereum ecosystem. And for a while, we tried to build video streaming into the core Ethereum stack, kind of building with the core developers at the Ethereum Foundation. And that was, a really fun time.
Yeah. Yeah. For those who don't know, in terms of like the mechanics of Ethereum, what in particular was more exciting about that particular technology, or what was it the relationship that it had between the nodes and, and how it kind of, the whole like it's changed from proof of stake to proof of work.
Proof of work to proof of stake.
Proof of work to proof of stake. Yeah. So what about the technology, and particularly were you particularly excited about and started building in that?
Yeah. Before Ethereum came out, Bitcoin was kind of the leading blockchain, right? And with the most momentum, certainly. And Bitcoin is very focused on like transfer of value, right? You have a token, send each other the token, and that's the extent. And people tried to build other types of programs on it, but it was very difficult. And in fact, Vitalik was trying to build that on top of Bitcoin, realizing that it was going to take too long, then decided to build Ethereum, right? And at the very beginning, the vision of Ethereum was really to build it like general purpose blockchain that, not only allow people to transfer value, but also allow people to execute programs. And with that ability, you can now basically do anything. Then we see all these subsequent, trends that happen on top of Ethereum, right? So I think the core of that smart contract layer, we're really made us exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. What in particular about video, and what were the limitations that you talked about, that there was proprietary platform limitations for other technologies that were being built and outside of Web3, but what in particular about video was exciting to you and starting to, create an infrastructure where you can build, video, integrate different video streaming platforms. And I saw there was another tool that it was built on with like video meeting platforms as well, and really just kind of, fostering this community of video in a Web3 world. What in particular about video was limited, and why did we select video as a technology or direction that you wanted to go with Livepeer and its infrastructure?
Yeah, for sure. Like, that's a great question. There are a couple of reasons why we decided video. One is that, video is about 80% of all the traffic on the internet, right? And, when we started, it was about, maybe 65, 70% 5 years ago, and now it's only grown, right? And so if you think about it, like most of the stuff that we do on the web is like video based.
Yeah.
And most of the data that goes through the wires is video. So at the very beginning, when we started working on, in this blockchain space and realized the profound impact that it can have on not only the technology, but really it's like a social technology, right? It changes the paradigm of how services get created and how users relate to each other. We built pretty strong conviction in the very early days that, in the future, everything was going to be blockchain based in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we, take that to the logical conclusion, well, people's behaviors don't change that much. People still want to watch video, right? So in the future state of the internet where everything's blockchain based, we need blockchain based video infrastructure in order for applications to be built that, can still allow people to watch video. And, at that time, no one was building that. And we had some video streaming experience, and we knew what it would take to build a video infrastructure. So we thought, okay, we're going to take that. It's going to be a long kind of vision. And, at the very beginning, we laid out a 7-year roadmap of the project with different stages. And, we started building from that point.
Yeah. You're about 6 years in, far along is that roadmap? Has that changed at all while you've been building?
Yeah, for sure. Things always kind of evolve in unexpected ways, right? So I would say one thing that has emerged is that, things always take longer to build. So we are probably at year number 3, 4 out of the 7-year roadmap. We were too optimistic when we made that roadmap. But not too far, but it's quite a common theme in any kind of infrastructure building in technology, right? Things just take a long time. Yeah, but I think we would have never thought of the rise of DeFi, the rise of NFT, now the rise of decentralized social, all these different trends. It's just so interesting to see how this thing emerged, right? So, when we first started, you can kind of see the direction, things are very foggy, right? You can only kind of, try to predict the future, but living through it, actually seeing it, turn by turn and how it plays out, it's just like a really interesting experience.
Yeah. And from a consumer standpoint, is there any improvements or differences? Like if I'm a consumer working with a technology that is built on the infrastructure, what changes will I see, or will it almost be a seamless transition?
Yeah, I think from a user experience on the application level, I don't think it will be too big of a difference, right? Like, and so I guess what I mean by that is the user experience in blockchain based applications will become pretty good, or will become, the same as any application that we use today. Like, the value that everyone gets will be different. And I think the number one difference would be that users will actually own their data instead of least giving their data to the platform, or kind of feeling like they're renting, from the platform. They're going to feel like they actually own what they have, right? And that's a huge difference. It's, you live in a house, you always want to own your house than to rent forever, right?
Right.
And I would say right now on the internet, we very much live in like feudalism, right? Where like every single user is renting access to Facebook, to, to Twitter, to like all these Web2 applications, right? But we're going to evolve beyond that. We're going to have like true digital ownership, which blockchain gives us. And, there's already really interesting emerging applications that are attempting to solve that problem. We're going to see that accelerate.
Yeah. Describe Livepeer Studios, and how is it different from Livepeer, the infrastructure?
Yeah. So Livepeer, the infrastructure, is a decentralized network, right? So it's made of, different nodes around the world. Think of it as like, it was like Airbnb from computers, right? Like people plug in their computers into this network and they can provide, video streaming services, video processing services to this network, and at the same time be paid for the work that they do, right? And then there's a whole protocol that exists to make this secure and reliable. And the interesting thing is, not only kind of hobbyists do this, but professionals do this as well, right? So you see the same trend happen in the Bitcoin mining world, where, at the very beginning it was hobbyist, and then now it's like certain, like, like the use of so much energy, which is not great, but it's been like professionalized. Data centers, operators do this, right? At a very high level. The same thing happens, with other networks like Livepeer, right? Where you have professionals with data center access, like running these operations so that they can contribute value and gain value from working within this network. So that's the Livepeer network, right? But in order to access the Livepeer network, you need to run a Livepeer node, and not everyone can run a Livepeer node, right? Even if you are a software developer, you don't necessarily want to run a node in order to access a service. You'd rather just be able to write an application and access the service, right? So Livepeer Studio allows you to do that. Like we call that a gateway service. And what that really means is just, it kind of takes away all the complexity of blockchain technology and makes it really simple for a developer to be able to create an application within, 30 minutes, right? And it feels exactly like the application development experience is very similar to what they're used to. And that's what Livepeer Studio does. It's kind of we call it like a one-stop shop for video developers that want to create kind of Web3 and blockchain-centric applications.
It's amazing, how you've evolved that to now allow developers to start building. I think when companies kind of focus, especially when they're working with developers and technology that enables developers to work, it's often to see how much more efficient and productive, a lot of these newer applications become readily available to consumers, and they even just built because all that technology is kind of prepackaged there. Tell us a little bit about the traction. So how many people are building on your project or in Studio? How many new technologies are kind of integrated into the infrastructure? What's exciting about this year's growth, and what are you particularly excited about next year's growth?
Yeah, for sure. I think the traction has been pretty great, but it's been recent, and especially in this blockchain space where, I'd say in the last year or so, when we really started seeing like consumer facing applications being built and becoming mainstream, right? Like probably the NFT craze is the first example of that, right? OpenSea, applications like that, where they really captured a consumer attention for Livepeer. There's been, hundreds of applications that have been built on the platform, ranging from hackathon projects all the way to, like venture funded companies that are using us, right? And right now, the Livepeer network process, anywhere between 2.5 to 3 million minutes of video per week, right? And, this like kind of new content that gets created on a weekly basis. And, we're still just at the beginning. It's a tiny little bit compared to the 80% of the internet, right? So we still have a long way to go. But what's exciting is, I think application developers are seeing, more and more application developers are seeing the promise of Web3 and how they can actually build these applications, right? Because, video streaming is just one aspect when you're building an app. You need all these other infrastructure pieces to be mature in order to build like a high quality consumer facing application. And it's just very recent that all of these pieces of infrastructures start to become good to build like the next YouTube or the next Facebook, right? And which is really exciting to see.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest risks that Livepeer faces today?
Yeah, I would say there's some market risk, right? So there's the risk of, the blockchain industry goes through cycles, right? So right now, I would say we're in the down cycle right now. There's, frauds happening in this space, right? There's a lot of criticism, and generally people are I guess, general perception of blockchain technology and Web3 has been more negative in the recent time than before. Yeah. So that's always a risk. And I would say the other risk is just the technology evolving not fast enough, right? But we think that's not the case. We think there's already really interesting use cases that, everyday users can be using, but, we're still in the early days for sure. Right. So seeing timing is probably the hardest thing to get right. And that's always and oftentimes also a big risk.
Yeah. Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Livepeer?
Yeah. I would say if everything goes well, Livepeer would just be the video infrastructure for any application, right? And because the interesting thing here is that no one owns Livepeer, the network, right? Livepeer, there's a company, that we've started that, responsible for fostering a community, right? But Livepeer is also an ecosystem and community. There's other people who are contributing to Livepeer, and there's a way for the contributors to get for their contribution. And that's a really important part, right? And so if you extend that into the future, one day Livepeer would just be the running underlining infrastructure of any video application, because it'll become more scalable. It's already 7 to 10 times cheaper than video services that are offered by like cloud services like Amazon, right? And it's only going to get even cheaper and much faster. We think the cost of using the Livepeer network, it's going to approach the cost of electricity, right? Because at the end of the day, that's like the cost that the infrastructure providers are using. Yeah. So I think that's going to be one aspect. The other aspect is that it'll be, an open platform, right? And what I mean by that is anyone can build applications on top of it. No one can stop you. You don't need to register for an Amazon account in order to use Livepeer. You don't even need to have a bank account to use Livepeer, right? You can have cryptocurrency and then build with that. Of course, it comes with risks. So there has to be good safety measures and moderation in place to make sure harmful content doesn't get proliferated. And those are problems that we're definitely working on and, have an idea on how to solve at scale. But the upside there is that we have this type of open innovation just unlocks so much more that we're not even seeing, right? If we look at the main way that we consume video today, it's, one person creates some video, they record it, and then they put it onto a streaming platform. And then they hope that, people will watch it, right? And they try to get people to watch it, right? And what happens is these types of videos start to look similar, and they start to become like very controlled genres that are basically influenced by the streaming platforms themselves, right? Yeah. And that's a very limiting way to think about the art of video creation, right?
Yeah.
And people should be able to create all kinds of videos, right? And the different types of video should have different values to different audiences. And video is really just a way of communication, right? It's a way of one person providing value to another person through talking to them or through showing them something. If you think of it in that way, the possibility is endless, right? And there's going to be different types of tools that become available for video creators to be much more effective in creating videos. We're seeing a lot of really interesting recent AI breakthroughs in how that can impact videos, right? So all of those things can grow much faster in an open platform where no one is the bottleneck and people can kind of contribute in this open way. So I think that's the really exciting upside that I'm looking forward to.
That's amazing. If you weren't working on Livepeer, what would you be doing?
I don't know, because I've been doing Livepeer for so long. I have no idea. Probably if I wasn't working on Livepeer, I would probably be working on some cool Web3 video applications myself. Right?
Yeah.
I guess through working on the infrastructure layer for the last 5-6 years, I've seen a lot. And I think there's some really interesting opportunities that I wish people are working on, but maybe if I wasn't working on this, I'd be working on something like that.
I love that. I would like to ask this next question for, just gems of knowledge and kind of thinking about what, has influenced you and impacted you. But whether it was early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
That's a great question. I would say, when I was in high school, my senior year of high school, I grew up in China and I came to the US when I was 16. And my senior year in high school, my English teacher gave us this book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces by the author Joseph Campbell, which is like a modern day philosopher. And this book is like a grad school level philosophy book, which was a pain in the butt to read as a high schooler, especially English as a second language. But it was really cool to go through that and learn this idea of someone's journey can, one person's journey is one person's journey. The way that you can relate to that journey can be very different, right? And that's this whole idea of the hero kind of with 1,000 faces. And by the way, this is the book that inspired Star Wars. George Lucas was a student of Joseph Campbell and invited him to teach him about this. And eventually through the conversation, inspired many of the character traits and the storylines of Star Wars.
It's incredible, how so many people can take different inspiration from whether it's pieces of knowledge or conversations. And it's awesome to see that, you hear, even all the way back in high school, you had this kind of antithesis or kind of highlighted moment that really stuck with you. And it's always cool from founders' perspective to hear what's been influential to them, because I just think it speaks to how diverse founders are in particular. But I think founders also have a very specific way of tackling the world through anecdotes and problems and solving, and have a similar mentality of kinship, and what leads to the kinship around founders. So Eric, I would like to I know we're at the end of the episode here, and I would like to give our founders a chance to give us your plugs. Let us know where, we can get involved with Livepeer Studios. What are your LinkedIns, your Twitters, your website? If I'm a developer, where can I start building?
Yeah, if you're developers, you can go to livepeer.studio. It's the easiest way to get started. It'll take you 10 minutes to get an application going. We're actually currently doing a promotion. If you go there and sign up through the sign up form, which I believe is going to be in the notes of the podcast, is lvpr.link/BCL. You get a $30 streaming credit. So you can get started even easier.
Incredible. Well, I hope you enjoyed yourself, Eric, and thank you so much for the stories, and thank you again for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you again for having me, Julian.
Of course.